and a ton of motivated voters and organizers supporting me, but it's nonsense that we're here.
Right.
And also running a cure process that treats military voters differently than other voters, that targets only one or a few counties. That whole process violates the federal constitution. And I am fighting tooth and nail to make sure that an unconstitutional process doesn't happen at all. Because if it happens once, it can happen again. If the process happens and I win, then my case is essentially moot.
Right.
And we have this terrible precedent on the books.
So that's the part I want to dig into. But before we get into that, because this cure process is still going on, and because it's still important to make sure that every single person who cast a ballot has a right to make sure that their ballot is actually counted. Is it still the case that folks who are watching and listening right now can go to rigsforourcourts.com to be able to check if they're on that list of roughly 1,400 North Carolinians whose ballots have been impacted?
Yep, they can go to my website. There's a tab at the top that says thegryphonlist.com. They can search for their name. The cure process has not officially started yet. So they can reach out to my campaign. I can help them figure out how to get their ballot cured. But the 30-day clock for the cure process hasn't started yet. And we're trying to get this process stayed in federal
Right.
court so that it doesn't happen at all. But if it does, it's probably going to be next week
Okay.
when that clock starts. Um, and so, we're walking and chewing gum at the same time. We're fighting in federal court against a process that burdens voters and creates terrible precedent for our democracy, and also investing heavily into the infrastructure it takes to reach even 1,600 voters who are serving in the military, deployed, could be out in the middle of nowhere or just overseas and hard to get a hold of. It's going to be a monstrous effort to get that done.
Right. That's the thanks these members of the military get as far as Republicans are concerned. They get disenfranchised here at home. That's what they get shipped off overseas to fight for their own disenfranchisement at the hands of this Republican Party. Okay, so we've spoken about the cure process. Now I do want to dig into what you were saying before about the prospect of dual track also trying to stop this in the appeals court from even moving forward because of the precedent that it will set. So where does this case lie in terms of the appeals court right now? Because I know that it had gone through the state court system all the way up to the North Carolina Supreme Court, and then it jumped over into the federal court system. Where does it stand right now?
Right. So this weekend, you'll remember a trial court judge in the federal court said the state board can't certify the election one way or the other until the federal court proceedings are done. So that's good. But he also said he wasn't going to stop the cure process from going into effect. I mean, I want to be clear that cure is a misnomer in so many
Right.
ways because these voters followed every rule,
Right.
did everything right. There is nothing to cure about their ballots.
Yeah.
The North Carolina Supreme Court, of course, can say what state law means going forward. They cannot, consistent with the federal constitution, look back and say, oh, those rules you followed in the run up to November 5th, never mind. So
Right.
there's nothing to cure, but nonetheless, um, we're fighting in federal court to make sure this process doesn't happen. It's going to be super expensive. It's going to be so confusing for voters. It creates a burden on voters. So their vote, these 1,600, at least some of them, it's a question about whether they even have an opportunity to cure or not. The vast majority do have an opportunity to cure, but the burden is on the voter now. The burden is on the voter who did everything right 6 months after an election, to be in communication. Like
Yeah.
we have in the federal court case. So we're at the appeals court now because we don't want this process to happen, and confuse people and undermine the people's faith in the process. But there was a voter who filed a lawsuit in this case, and she and her husband are military families, or husbands in the service. She's a military spouse. They're in Europe and they are currently in transit between bases and stationing. So they have literally no fixed address right
Yeah.
now. And so she's like, if I got notice that I needed to cure, I have no idea where that notice would go because I
Right.
literally right now don't have access to mail. And that's just, it's one story, but it's a snapshot of the fact that we are, if we let this happen, one, the federal constitution prohibits it, but two, it is placing an incredible burden and stressor on military service members and their families.
Right.
So I come from a military family, and my mom always said, look, my dad served our country and she did too, because she was, with four kids while he was, gone serving his country. And it's just, I'm really grateful that service members and their families have been willing to speak up and speak out. And I also know it's about protecting them and it's about protecting this process. And I am deeply worried about something happening here that makes it okay for this to happen again. So if my opponent is allowed to do this cure process and I win, which I did, then I worry if that stands, if he was allowed to do that, even if he's again disappointed with the outcome, that come 2025 municipals, come 2026 midterms, candidates who are unhappy with the election result can go back and look at all the election laws on the books and say, if we struck one of those, would I have won? And if so, I'm going to challenge those because there is
Right.
nothing prohibiting changing the rules of an election after the election if you want to see a different outcome. So you can see how ominous a threat that is.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, wouldn't this establish a precedent for Republic? Like, yes, this would be a loss for Jefferson Griffin, but it would be a win for the Republican Party more broadly because they would have a blueprint then to be able to say, okay, sure, we didn't win this one race, but who cares? Because now we know what to do in order to challenge the results of every election that doesn't go our way moving forward. We have the blueprint to be able to say we can cherry pick a bunch of deep blue Democratic counties and say that, all of these voters don't count, all of these overseas voters don't count, and everything has to be cured, knowing full well that the onus is then on people who are really difficult to find to be able to come back and do the whole process again, even folks who don't have access to be able to cast their ballots again. And so isn't there some major concern about the fact that this would be precedent not only by virtue of the fact that they've tried it, but also the fact that really this cure process would have been upheld by an appeals court, which legally does make it precedent.
Right. It's something that I've been trying to communicate to people from the very beginning. And you have offered this platform for me to get the word out. But I'm here because it's important that folks know that even while it's a good thing that the numbers of affected voters might be shrinking,
Yeah,
it doesn't obviate or make it less important to focus on the real existential threat too.
right.
No, not one voter, one eligible voter being disenfranchised is too many. And I will fight till my last breath to make sure that every eligible vote counts. And I just need people to understand that this is still so important. And it has never been about me or my race. It has always been about, do we live in a democracy where voters get to speak and the people in power have to respect what the voters decide, even if they don't like it? And if we open this Pandora's box, we are never going to get this undone. It's going to hang out there. It's going to get used again and again and again in a way that will destroy faith in democracy, create massive apathy. Why should I go vote? I can't even, finish an election cycle and know whether or not my vote will count because someone might come along
Right.
down the road and challenge it. I really am trying to let people know how important this issue is, even as the facts change and the number of voters change that are implicated change.
Well, look, I think that the things that are important to remember right now is that as of right now, the cure process is still moving forward. So for anybody who's watching, if you think you